staying warm this weekend, and we welcome you into our program, Moral Side of the News. I'm John Blim with the WHAS Crusade for Children. With me, as always, is a distinguished panel: Reverend David Harkleroad, South Point Church, New Albany; Rabbi Emeritus Joe Rooks, Rapport, the Temple; Reverend Clay Calloway, West Louisville Ministers Coalition; and Father Tony Smith, Archdiocese of Louisville. Welcome, panel. Our first topic today, we begin today with the Arctic blast that blanketed the country. The winter weather reminds us of 30 years ago. The winter storm of '94 paralyzed this region. Some areas got up to 2 feet of snow, and Shelbyville dropped to minus 37 degrees.
Mercy.
That's the coldest temperature ever recorded in Kentucky. Panel, do you have any fond memories of the storm of '94, or memories at all?
I have vivid memories of '94. I was recalling a dear friend of mine. Her father had died on that day. It was on King Day in '94. I think when the snow actually hit, somewhere right in there. So I remember that, and of course how difficult. We actually snowed in, couldn't get out, couldn't go anywhere. She was trying to make arrangements for her father's funeral. It just brought everything to a standstill, and you had to just wait it out. I mean, Mother Nature is undefeated. Right. So it just brought everything to a halt and a standstill. And we just don't have winters like that anymore. I mean, I was sharing with Joe, I've been a Michigan guy. I mean, I used to live in Michigan. You know, it's normal up there, but here it's not as frequent. But I remember it vividly.
I go back even further to the 70s, early 70s. I was in the military at the time. My sister was getting married and trying to get a flight back to Louisville for the wedding and whatever. And the Red Cross said, we can get you to Louisville, but you can't leave the airport. That's when the governor closed the state down. So it was so deep back in the 70s. Some folks are, you're too young to remember that movie. So.
I remember it vividly because I was trapped in our house for a week with my mother-in-law, who was frantically trying to get out of Louisville because she had pressing issues at home in Tucson, which is where she lives now. But that was a long week. I remember that. I still love my mother-in-law, a testament to family love. I did want to say that growing up in Michigan, Upper Michigan, there's this common, perception that that the weather, the cold weather, breeds sort of a rugged individual. But I come to the conclusion that it builds strong communities. Because I remember waking up in the morning as a high school kid, seeing college kids littered on the floor around our fireplace because the power had gone off someplace or another. And I'm a football fan, but watching the stories of Packer quarterback Jordan Love pulling some car out of a ditch, and a Buffalo player helping along, with the Buffalo fans sitting there making their own fireworks out of the snow. It's a sense of reminder that we're all in this together, and sometimes we need just that moment of reminder that we depend on each other and need to as a community. David.
I was living in Ohio, and I would guess we had similar weather, but I was young enough, I don't really remember.
Rub it in.
I'm sure I was out missing school and enjoying the snow. Yeah.
Good to be young, that's for sure. Okay, a question about this week and this time and now. Are we doing enough or doing our best for those who are at risk in weather like this?
One thing is a stark contrast between now and then, say '94. We did have a visible homeless population then as we do now. This is a relatively recent phenomenon in Louisville. We always had the poor, of course, but never the homeless on the streets like we see now. It didn't exist then. Clearly, it was managed differently. I'm sure you had poor, destitute people then, but not in visible places on the street, on the viaducts, in places like downtown Louisville like you see here now. So that's a stark contrast between the times. I don't know if we're doing a poor or worse job accommodating for people in dire need, but it didn't. It was not evident then in the way that it is now.
One aspect of that could be, Clay, is that the laws have changed, and those individuals, for instance, who would be considered mentally challenged or whatever, by law at that time were housed. And with the law being changed, they cannot be housed now. So what are they going to do? They're going to turn them out. It may not be a great number.
No, it's a significant number.
Significant number, yes.
Yeah. So I remember back then, I was involved in the Coalition for the Homeless. I was the chair for a couple of years, and we are in a much better place now as a community because of the establishment of some wonderful institutions and more coordinated efforts. But we are never doing enough for the homeless in our community, and it's only times when the temperature drops or the temperature soars or something like that we're reminded of it. But it's a year-long, it's a lifelong thing. Caring for the poor and the needy in the community is what a religious community, what a faithful community, what a good and righteous community needs to always be doing.
Mm-hmm. That's a good word. I agree with all of that. There's always more we could do. I think we are improving. I live on the other side of the river in Indiana, and had my kids at the library. It was evening just before closing, and some homeless folks had assembled there, and they have some transportation. They do a pickup and take people somewhere warm. So I was just encouraged to see our community pulling together, doing things for folks who are out in the cold. But certainly we could always do more, and I do think what you said, there's a righteous aspect to our responsibility there.
Right. And you see churches and other religious institutions opening their doors at times like this too, which to me says it's wonderful to be able to preach your faith, but to live it.
Yes.
That's the true sign of discipleship of Jewish Christian traditions. So.
All right, well, we know there's a winter weather advisory again this weekend, so we hope you're staying warm wherever you are. And thanks for watching and listening to our program, Moral Side of the News, our second topic on this program today. Former President Trump is juggling appearances on the campaign trail as well as appearances in a New York City courtroom. Iowa Republicans chose him over his rivals in the primary caucus. Meantime, outbursts he made in court have prompted the judge in his civil defamation case to threaten Trump from being thrown out of that courtroom. Panel, it looks like Mr. Trump will be oscillating between campaign stops and 4 pending criminal trials in the months ahead. So a question for you is, how does this look to voters and to the Republican Party in general?
Well, I mean, it speaks for itself. It's played out in plain sight. You have an electorate in Iowa, Republican caucus, that selected Donald Trump. Twice impeached, 91 count indicted, Donald Trump as their best candidate to run for president. That says it all. It speaks to a kind of a political depravity, for lack of a better word. It just speaks to where we are. The scripture has a lot to say about it. In Isaiah it says, "Woe to those who call evil good, good evil, put light for darkness, darkness for light, bitter for sweet, sweet for bitter." Though we just flip the script. And we know that there's a group among these, particularly the Republican side, that have decided to cast their lot with Donald Trump no matter what. And it is created a kind of a depraved political environment. And the sad part about it is that the Republican Party, the electorate now, who wish they could have stopped it, didn't. When they had the opportunity, McCarthy and McConnell, they had a chance to stop it after the last impeachment. They had a chance to stop it then, but they elected not to, and then they can't stop it. It's a runaway train. So this is what the Republican Party has come through. This is what this country has revealed in the repeated election or selection of this man, who's a two-time loser, I might add. He lost the pop election twice. So he is the clear antithesis to a ideal candidate. He continues to be selected by this group, and that's kind of been like a political silo. So. Yeah.
Well, it is what it is. I mean, but remember, caucuses are not the electorate. And then what's added to that in regards to the man's character, whatever, is no exposure is bad exposure in a sense. As he said to the judge in the courtroom, I should throw you out. He says, go ahead, do it. That would edge him up among his followers. But I would say, not being that political, I'm neither Republican nor Democrat, but I would say that it's too early in a sense to call the election. And steamrolling as it is, he steamrolled last time as well. And his steamrolling has got him into all kinds of legal issues type thing. So I would simply say it is what it is, and we'll see what transpires down the road for the other primaries.
If I can follow up on Tony's thoughts, I think that we need to take a step back from the media presentation. Nothing against the media. We're here at WHAS. Right. that this was a a huge victory in the Iowa caucuses, and I say that because he won just over 50% of the caucus goers, and that's hardly for a former president an overwhelming figure, particularly given that the other candidates have sort of divided up all the other alternative votes. Also, that only that there was a decrease. It was only like 60%.
The turnout
was only like 60%.
The weather was a big factor.
The weather was a big factor, but that also affects it's only the most zealous who are going to go. So I think that in a conservative state, you had a very conservative body of people voting for it. But just imagine for a moment that the first Democratic primary in South Carolina, if President Biden were to have a huge victory of over 50%. Against a crowded field of other people behind him, that would be considered like, oh my God, there's a terrible problem, and he doesn't have the support even of his own party, in an admittedly conservative, primary. So that this narrative that it was an overwhelming victory because it was, a large distance between him and the next of the challengers, I think, is overstated in that regard. And I think as Tony was alluding to, that this is representative of a vote. This means that half of the people in a party that represents roughly half of the American electorate in a very conservative environment, that's 25% on election day. And there's a lot of time and votes between now and then.
And it is a caucus, too. You reminded it is a caucus is different than a primary.
And I would say the numbers that were generated from this event, I would put in the same category as the numbers that the president would say he had the greatest number at the swearing-in ceremony, which he didn't. He had the greatest number, whatever. I mean, it's just touted again in regards to the credibility gap.
Leaving you out.
Oh, you're fine. I'm just listening to you guys, trying to think how I want to respond.
I know. It's politics. It's hard.
Yeah, it is.
Politics, right?
I think I said this in a previous week. I think we're going to end up with a Trump-Biden rerun. I do think Iowa points to that. That's my opinion. And I think whether it's at the caucus level or at the national actual election, I think it's disappointing that we have those two candidates. Yeah. And, Clay, speaking a little bit to what you were talking about, I think Republicans and Democrats both are in a hard spot because of our two-party system, because of the way we have these two polls. I've been increasingly interested in ranked choice voting. I think Andrew Yang kind of was talking about that 4 years ago, 3 years ago, and got me interested, where people could put a vote for maybe a candidate they thought was ideal. And I think that we're just in a place that's very difficult to do that. It's hard to vote for maybe who you think is an ideal candidate. We're sort of stuck often with one of two polarizing choices. So it's easy to look and maybe condemn a Trump voter or a Biden voter, but I think a lot of people feel like they don't have another option. Even when it comes to the caucus, they feel like maybe it's a wasted opportunity.
If I can turn to the courtroom aspect, which I think carries much more of the moral side kind of question here. The prophet Amos talks about justice as something that should be equal for rich and poor, powerful and weak. The prophet Nathan speaks truth to power, even to the face of the king. And yet we live in a world where powerful individuals, like Mr. Trump, can disregard courtroom behavior, trying to sway the jury, can castigate the judge, the prosecutor in court, and in the court of public opinion, in ways that any other individual in our society would be found to be absolutely reprehensible, and they would be sanctioned. Contempt of court. It would not be allowed. And I think that really speaks, to the way in which not just this case, but many cases get decided by the wealth of the individual and their ability to be able to hire legions of lawyers, and the expectation that for many people this whole process degrades our trust in an essential pillar of our democracy, which is the fair and nonpartisan and judicially balanced courtroom.
Well, I like what you said about the court. The court is really one of the final checks. That's the finger in the dike.
It always has been. Justice has always been.
It's grinding in a way that's different than the political arena. If you look at all the many judgments, in fact, he was found guilty in the last court with this fraud trial, but the courts are running counter to what is going on politically. So that's when the buck is going to stop. It appears to be stopping when he's facing the court. He doesn't have any more power. Now, he could win in the court of public opinion in some respects, but that's different than what goes on inside the courtroom.
You mentioned the aspect of a buck, and unless he starts paying his attorneys, they keep leaving him.
They're leaving him.
Yeah.
He can represent himself, which he attempts to do from time to time, but the courts is probably our last best hope in this regard. It is kind of ironically proven its worth and value in this whole process. So we'll see, and it appears to be doing just that.
I have several concerns in this process. So, I don't feel that I need to defend Donald Trump, his character. There are a lot of undesirable things about Donald Trump, and time will tell how much of that has been criminal. But I do think there is an element of political persecution here, and I think that even progressives should be concerned about this. Let me say it this way, if he were not running for president again, would he have 90-some indictments against him? I honestly don't think so. I think there's a reason these things are being pursued. Now, are they justified? Time will tell. I think time will play that out. But I think as far as our political system goes, it concerns me the way that Donald Trump is being pursued at this time.
Well, persecution and prosecution sound alike, but they're quite different. Persecution is when you are suffering for, quote, righteousness' sake. It's a different experience. Prosecution is brought into play when you are in conflict with the law of the land. So there's a fundamental difference between persecution and prosecution. What he's going through now is prosecution. He's calling it persecution. He's calling it bittersweet and sweet bitter. But no, he's not going through persecution. He's going through prosecution. These are crimes. These are things he's done on his own that he's called into question for. He's called into account for things that he indeed has done. So it's quite different.
Well, I think personally, I think it remains to be seen. Again, it may be the case, but I'm not saying it's a persecution for righteousness. It's a political persecution. I think because of his political views, people are out to get him. I do believe that. Now, could some of this prosecution be reasonable? It may well be. Again, I'm not saying that's impossible, but I think the weight of prosecution brought against him, which is not at this point conclusive, is evidence to me that there is political persecution here.
Well, I mean, the indictments require, grand juries to bring charges. So, I mean, once or two you may say, yeah, maybe. But the overwhelming amount, the avalanche of charges brought against him in the court of law that has passed the muster of grand juries. I mean, so you go into a bipartisan group of people that are not politicized, who are participating in the indictment of this individual, that are not bound by political ideologies. So their criteria for evaluating right and wrong or criminality and non-criminality is quite different than those that may be political allies.
Yeah. You'd have to add as well, I think, a number of cases that are overseen by Republican judges who have ruled against him. So I would say, in the sense of saying it's political, I don't know. I would like to, as you say, time will tell. But I think we'll all come out in the wash. I'm reminded of Clay's comment about he wants to, as he tried to testify himself at the court. What's the old saying? Attorney who has himself as a client as a fool, a fool for a judge. So.
Well, let me return just to the question about whether or not there's political persecution. Do any of you believe that if he had just gone and licked his wounds and not run for office again, that he would be facing 90 indictments?
No,
do you think that would be the case?
Let me interject just to say, I think that the reason for the multitude of charges in multiple states and in federal court is also because our political process has a way to deal with this. It's called the impeachment process, and it's the failure of that process where a litany, any and all of these things, could have been brought, and most of them were, as charges for impeachment. He was impeached on a partisan basis in a partisan court of the House, and in the Senate, he was, on the argument of our Senator, Mitch McConnell, You know, if
Absolutely.
you have
said
issues,
let the courts decide.
If you have issues of this in this regard, we don't need to, you know, impeach him in the last days of his office. Let the courts decide.
That's what he said.
And that's exactly what everybody now has to do. The state of New York has to you know, prosecute him for saying how much, you know, my property is worth, in, you know, when applying to bankers, and a different number when applying to tax returns. The state of Georgia, you know, has to, you know, bring a case having to do with the election interference. You know, in the state of New York, you know, E.J. Carroll has to have this, where in previous Democratic commissions, just, you know, that level of sexual impropriety would have been enough to impeach a president. It was. So I think it's a failure of the political system, which is built into the Constitution, to address this in one case, and it would have been. And that with that failure, we now have this multitude of things that, well, if you want to pursue this, it needs to go to New York court. And if you want to pursue that, it needs to go to an Atlanta court. And thus we have all these indictments, as opposed to one, which was the indictment, you know, under impeachment.
All right, panel, we're off to a good running start here on Moral Side of the News.
We're running.
We've got a little bit more time left. A third topic, a little change, a little lighter topic. The question at hand is this: would you be willing to take a 20% pay cut to have a better work-life balance? That was the question Ford Motor Company executives asked its employees worldwide. The executives said they were shocked to learn that more than half of their employees said, yes, we'll do that. Their survey covered topics like mental health, climate change, and family life. Panel, let's hear your thoughts on a simpler, better family life with 20% pay.
Well, I don't know about that, but historically, Ford was a leader. Henry Ford was a leader in transforming the workplace. When he introduced the $5 a day and the 40-hour week, that was revolutionary. And it was designed to make for a more reasonable work environment, work week, less of a sweatshop. You know, so he created a revolutionary, more humane work environment by that $5 a day and that 40-hour week. And it proved to be a very workable solution, because he raised the bar and took Ford to a new height and changed the whole industry, because he made that innovation. So many, especially younger workers, they don't work the way our fathers and grandfathers and so forth work with that same level. They want other life-affirming qualities in their work experience, spend more time with their family, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're going to compete in the workplace, I think this is something that is the wave of the future. It appears to be something that some of the younger workers prefer this, and they probably are just saying, yeah, this is probably where things are going. Less money, more life.
I'm curious as regards to the question was asked in regards to whether the shorter work week or whatever it might be, or the less pay, the question was asked whether or not they see this as part of an entitlement. The youngsters, young adults in this, in my understanding, right, in the current generation, I'm kind of old now, but they seem to have a sense of what they want is when they want it is an entitlement they have. It's a liberty or a freedom that they have, which they don't have responsibility for. Added to that, I think it's a good start to one direction, but I wonder also the aspect of selfishness comes to mind, in a sense. The Judeo-Christian concept of faith, as I understand it, is more geared towards servitude, being servant. And how many of these people are saying they want less time?
So it's more about me, is what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying. It's more about selfishness, about me, rather than about the truth. If it's great for family life, et cetera, I applaud that. But at the same time, I'm wondering whether or not the question the survey is asked dealt with that whole thing of entitlement and selfishness.
I think that, you know, well, I rise in defense of the young generation. I have a lot of hope and faith in them. I think that a lot of this is post-COVID issues, and I'd be interested to see, you know, how this plays out. Yeah. Because we lost 1 million people in this country, and it really radically, you know, altered our workforce and the way we work. And I think it produced a lot of, you know, thoughtful, I mean, people who didn't realize they were in a frontline, you know, job working at Kroger, okay, you know, and risking their lives to feed us all, you know, began to really sort of reevaluate, you know, what work means to them. And there are countries all over the world that have 4-day work weeks, and they seem to survive, and they have a much more balanced life. And much less mental health challenges, and a good family life. And if your reason for wanting a more balanced life really comes down to that balance, that two-parent families struggling to make enough of a living to be able to pay for other people to take care of their kids, I think you can make a good case for the fact that this is a good holistic challenge. And people in professions that made the decision to be teachers or doctors or, dare I say, clergy, took more than a 20% cut in order to be able to live a more balanced life, because there should be more to life than how much you've amassed in the bank.
Right.
Yeah, I can kind of see both sides to this. One of the things that it strikes me as is decadence, and I mean that in this regard. We are obviously removed to a point from survival that nobody's thinking about that. If we were in a survival state, people wouldn't say, I'll take less time, less pay. So it says something about where we are as a society, and I think there's goods and bads. I think what Clay said, like the family wage, the living wage, these are good things, that we're not working in sweatshops. But you hit a point where it becomes an entitlement. It becomes expected. Some of you might have seen this miniseries, Adams, I think is what it was called. And the French asked John Adams, why would you want to engage in warfare? And he said, I have to study war so my sons can study engineering, so their sons can study art and music. And I think we're in that third layer where it's like we have a lot of free time. We have a lot of comforts. We have a lot of things that we don't have to have. So I think it can be good, but I think there could be a lot of entitlement wrapped up in it, like you're saying.
Well, nothing is more entitlement. We're in a generation now where the gap between the corporate heads and the workers has never been wider. So if there's ever going to be a word of selfishness applied, I think it would apply to the top. And no one is more selfish than the corporate heads. So I think we're seeing a leveling out of the work. COVID did that. It considered the least of these. Anytime you start seeing bonuses offered to White Castle workers, a bonus offered to a McDonald's worker to come and join the work team, so you're starting to see a leveling. So I think it's a good thing of a leveling out, some sense of parity in the workplace.
An aspect of it as well, I just came out this past week, a different study showing that the percentage of those who were in corporate world, instead of coming into office, they still, even the corporations want the workers to work at home.
Yes. Well, they used to. Now they're worried about it.
Well, they're worried about it, but at the same time, it seems that someone's done a study to show that for the corporation, it's cheaper to have them work at home.
Oh, yeah, in many cases, yeah.
And so that has to fit into the mold too, and I think that because of the COVID routine, whatever, that fits in as well. So it's the work in this country again is an ongoing process.
Well, for 3 years we did this program,
You
Work
did.
from
And you did a great
Home.
job producing, I might add.
And
John.
now we're back in studio and we like it just as well.
And we're not getting paid a penny more.
And it probably takes 20% less time. But we'll find out. Thanks for watching and listening to this edition of Moral Side of the News. Thanks to David Harkleroad, Joe Rooks Rapport, Clay Calloway, and Tony Smith. We'll be back with an all-new program again right here next week. Until then, so long.
Nice to share this with you. This is definitely